I am the 21st century superhuman, and I know that the answers are inside. Yeah, I am the 21st century superhuman. Now is the time. Come on everyone, let's celebrate. We are the children of the sun. I can see it when I look into your eyes. We are the same, and we are light, yeah, we are one. And we can make a difference, yeah, we can be the change it takes to make the world a lot more fun.
Hi there, I'm Cary Ellis, author of 21st Century Superhuman. This is our 21st Century Superhuman show. And today I'm here with my friend Uncle Phil. Hey Phil, how are you doing today?
Hi Cary, thanks for inviting me. I'm delighted to be here.
So glad to have you. And what's so exciting is you and I have been both involved for many years in the background of helping work on global humanitarian projects and move forward the idea of global funding to help hydrate the system where many are suffering around the world. There's needed infrastructure and just help for regular people to move their lives into creative, joyous lifestyles. So yeah, here we are together having another conversation like we've had many times. What's your take on where we're at right now?
Well, that's a huge question, and it's an interesting question. And I've been following this story for over 10 years now and expecting this to be happening, for 25 years and wondering why it hasn't. And I do understand, how complex this story is, and it's not an easy thing to explain or to wrap your head around.
That's why go ahead. That's why we agreed to have this conversation, because so many people they ask me all the time, what's going on? Why is it taking so long, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, sorry to interrupt you, but you're right.
That's all right.
That's why we're having this conversation, is to give kind of an update.
Yeah, and what I'm about to share is my best guess at where we're up to and what's going on. Some of the stuff is easily researchable online, and other stuff that I'm sharing is hard-fought understandings and knowledge that I've pieced together like a jigsaw puzzle, trying to figure out, who's who and what's what and how it all pieces together and what's about to happen as best I can explain it. So some of it's hard, cold facts, and some of it's warm evidence, and some of it may be speculation, but I'll try and be clear about which bits I know and which bits I'm guessing as we move through this conversation.
Beautiful. And I'll probably jump in now and then with my knowing from 21st Century Superhuman that we are creators and our thoughts create. And each one of us, in what we know in our minds and hearts, what we focus upon is helping create the world that we're moving into. And that is so critical for us to understand. It's critical that we don't get caught up in news that's designed to program us in fear and doubt. And it's really important that we access our own individual sense of self as a creative global citizen and begin following our hearts to participate and to help envisioning and actually taking action towards the changes we'd like to see.
Yeah, and we need to be positive about this story because change is coming, change is happening.
Yes.
And although it's difficult to see it in everyday life, behind the scenes and behind the curtain of control, things are dramatically being readjusted.
Yes.
And, we need to see this from a different vantage point to our regular lives, because if you believe what we've been taught to believe, it's the truth isn't to be found there.
That's exactly right. And I think we really love the movies, the Matrix movies, in a way that story about the Matrix system is somewhat true. And it is important that we wake up from what's an old program, so to speak. I believe that we are literally rising up from what we might call an ancient slavery program, or perhaps it was just a program to take care of growing humanity as they grew up. But here we are, and we're ready to take charge of our world. So rather than all of the resources siphoning up to the few, they are going to be redistributed to the many.
Yeah, yeah. And I think at this point, I'll give a description of truth, because there's more than one truth in the world. There's personal truths and there's universal truths. And
Yes.
you know, what you believe to be true is not necessarily the whole truth and nothing but the truth. You know, it's what you believe in any one moment
Right.
that you believe is to be true, but it may not necessarily be true for others, or, you know, a holistic truth. So, and this is the schooling system. Well, let's start with the debt clock. You know, we all understand, and this is a hard, cold fact, that, you know, the debt is now, you know, some people call it $75 trillion, and other people can call it $244 trillion, you know, depending on how you measure it and what's being calculated. It's an enormous sum of money. And it's unpayable, because, as we know, that the banking system creates the dollars off the application form signature, but they never create the dollars to pay the interest. But the question I like to ask people is, who's getting the interest?
That's a really
Somebody's...
good question. And Uncle Phil, so this interest accrued, and I took this screenshot earlier, but please tell us also, if you can, what is this debt? We have two different kinds of debt here, right?
Well, one's government debt, and the other one's the government debt included with the personal debt and the corporate debt.
Right.
So the 244 trillion is a roundup of all debts in the system.
So where does this debt come from, though? Because isn't really all of these monetary exchanges, aren't they kind of made up anyway?
Well, they are, and it's fiat debt. It's not real debt. You know, it's fiat currency is currency that is paper and is fake, essentially. And the way banks create debt is by monetizing the signature on your application form. Once you've signed an application form at the bank and promised to pay back $100,000 or whatever number is on that piece of paper, that becomes an asset on the bank's books, because you've promised to pay X amount of dollars over a certain amount of time. And that's an asset, because you've got to earn real money through sweat labour, and you're going to commit yourself to pay that funding off. So they're able to monetize your promise and call it an asset in the bank and create money out of nothing in order to loan you the money. But the interest is never created, because you didn't sign up with an interest on the document. You only signed up for the principal. So in order to pay back the interest, the world needs to go into more and more debt. And this is how it's been built up over time. And it's a house of cards that can't stand. But the more interesting point is, who's collecting the interest? Deutsche Bank, as we know, has lost, you know, half of their share price in the last 12 or 18 months. And, you know, in 2008, the banks were in a crisis because they were going broke, essentially. And the system created $26 trillion to pull them back into solvency. So if the banks aren't receiving the interest, who is? It's going somewhere.
Right. Where? Donde?
Yeah. So if we step back a bit from that question, the banks like to make things sound more complicated than they are. And they've created a way of doing that, and that's through the educational process. Schools were invented in Germany to get people off the land and into factories. They wanted obedient workers, not you know, clever thinking individuals. So over 3 generations or more, we and our parents and our children are going through an educational system that allows people to come out at the end of the system dumbed down, able to work a job, but not able to think critically.
Right.
And the lies that we've been told through that process are just so monumental and vast that it's very hard to unpick. You know, if we if we think about how we learn things and how our belief systems are created, we often believe the first thing that we're taught about any particular subject. And if we hear that repeated often enough, and perhaps it's only 6 times, that becomes true in our lives and we believe it to be true. But there are other ways of looking at the world and things that we haven't been taught that are true. And if we're able to, step out of the lie and look at the world from a different perspective, we're able to see the lie for what it is and then move on. But finding the truth in the world, and then once you've found it, sharing it with other people is enormously difficult because people are fixed and stuck in their beliefs, whether they're right or wrong. So it's a challenge.
Indoctrination, or we call it programming, but it's that repetition that gets us thinking in a singular way instead of more expansively as the creative beings that we are.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it's all invasive because televisions run programs.
Absolutely.
And, think of the word that they're using. It's a program.
Right.
And when I turn the TV on these days, and I very rarely do, I can see the programs instantly. They're oozing out of every pore of every sentence. The male and female dynamic and the government dynamic and the cop shows,
Right.
They're reinforcing the program constantly with every television show.
And as I learned many years ago, the television programs literally bypass the frontal lobe of the brain that we have as a filter to determine whether we want these kinds of things coming and going. But the frequency messages of our electronic devices bypass our filtering mechanism. So anyway, yes.
Yeah. And this slide is the agenda of the Bilderberg conference over the last 2 years. And if you look at the second last point on the left, it's the post-truth world. Now, what the heck does that mean? I've heard it said that the CIA have done their job when everything that we believe is false. And it's a devastating thought or idea or program that they're running on us. And on this year's agenda, we've got the weaponization of social media. Now, we can see that happening. We know it's happening. When I turn on YouTube these days, I don't see what I've been searching for in the past. I see clips from television shows and clips about, fake history and all this other stuff that, maybe I'll click on it occasionally, but really I'm not interested in it. I'm interested in finding your show or, somebody else's show that is reporting the truth or real news.
Well, despite
and they don't come up in the feed.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
No, that's it. They don't come up in the feed because it's all being shadow banned, and it's the weaponization of social media.
Well, but the good thing is that even though there are these other agendas, we still do have the ability to put alternative news out, and that is really nice.
And thank goodness for that too.
Yes.
Yeah.
There will be a list of these links under the video so that if anybody wants to study further, we've got just a major number of links, really important information.
Back in 2006 or thereabouts, a group of research scientists in Switzerland crunched the numbers on transnational corporations and who owned them. And what they came up with was about 147 major transnational corporations that weren't able to be unpicked with regard to the ownership. They owned each other in such a complex network that it was very difficult or frankly impossible to split it all up. Now, each of those 147 included, the big banks, the big oil companies and the like. And each of those corporations owned on average 20 of the other large transnational corporations, so that there was a network of 1,800 major transnational corporations that were all owned as a one entity, as a block. And each of those owned, well, as a collective, they owned 40% of the rest of the world's economy. So the ongoing consolidation of control has been going on for hundreds of years now. since the days of Waterloo being won and lost over in Europe. The consolidation through the stock market has been taking place, and the Federal Reserve being established was one element in that, the final element of control, if you like, or there were more. The World War One was about consolidating central banks across Europe. World War Two was about doing the same thing around the rest of the world, and the coups that have been run since then were to finish off the job.
So what we're going to get into here is how these conglomerates basically run just about everything in the world. Will we get back to, will we kind of come out in this, what the Bilderberg agenda is, how it plays into all this?
Well, that's just one of the network of controls mechanisms. They set the agendas for each year on how this block is going to operate and behave. But if we click down the slides, we'll see how the network of control has bought out everything. The media owns the pharmaceutical companies in a bilateral arrangement. That's why the news always has a pharmaceutical story. There's a cure for this, there's a cure for that.
So
there is a cure for cancer. It's been around forever.
Right. Let me see. In the middle of this, it does say Bilderberg Group in the middle of this. So this is the entire kind of management system of the whole corporate structure on the planet, right? Wouldn't you say?
Yeah.
I mean, and familiar things such as McDonald's and Lilly and Ford and FedEx and Sara Lee, Xerox, 3M, Microsoft, DuPont, it's just Siemens.
All the categories are there. You've got the food industry consolidated, the pharmaceutical consolidated, the media is being more and more consolidated, and we can see that one evident in our lives. The car industry has been consolidated. Everything is being consolidated. When the $26 trillion was created post the financial crisis, they didn't spend it on infrastructure or returning financing to the people. They spent it on share buybacks to, again, control and own more of their own network. So, the idea that the superannuation funds own the large majority of the, corporations of the world is simply a fabrication of the truth. And private equity firms is one way of disguising who owns what.
I can even see National Geographic Society up in the corner here. It was interesting putting these together, who's really in here around the edges. The links to look at these images will be under the description of the video. So it's an amazing thing when you start realizing, I mean, I've always known that 8 families, 147 corporations basically run everything in the world, including the governments. And when you start looking at these kind of grids, you realize how extensive that is. It's in everything that we know and do on a daily basis.
Yeah, and it's very difficult to escape it. Any small business that manages to pop their head above the average either gets shut down or bought out.
Right.
And many people in my world have started a business with the expectation that they will be bought out by the large corporations at some stage, and they work to that end.
Right.
To create a market share, to create a product and service that is then deemed as attractive to be approached in a buyout.
Well, Uncle Phil, how do you, why do you feel this is? What's at the core of this?
Well, it is what it is. And at the core of it, there's been a trick played on even the participants. And we'll get to the details of that in a moment. But there's been a consolidation of wealth, and it started back with the kings and queens of the world, and they set up a network of cooperation. Years ago, we used to have wars every 70 years, and that would give the families of the world, the royal families of the world, a chance to consolidate the wealth that they have a generation of peace before the next generation that hadn't been born had to fight it out again. And this was essentially control of assets, control of populations, and control of the money supply. And there was some elements within those royal families that had an idea that the world could be run on a more benevolent setting, and that this wealth that they had amassed over many generations could be put to better use for the entire humanity. So they set up a process of consolidating the wealth amongst themselves and then sharing it. And they were looking to create a trustee that would represent all of them. And slowly over time, that consolidation has gotten to the point where we are now. But the trustee, who was at the very top, has played a nasty trick on them all by getting them to pledge all of their assets into a trust and giving them paper as compensation in order for them to run their lives. But there's a difference between assets and paper. You know, you transfer the title of your land to me, and I'll give you paper money as a compensation. But the paper's not a real asset. It's just, foldable stuff that doesn't really have intrinsic value. And as we know, through the power of inflation, the power of the dollar is diminished over time. And, you know, what you can buy for $1 now is radically different to what you could buy with $1 50 years ago. So this consolidation has been taking place for hundreds of years. They were trying to put in place an interbreeding program between 150 royal families to create an heir that would represent all of them in their bloodlines, as a way of finding who would be, excuse me, this one trustee that would manage the entire system on their behalf. Now, this is the bit where I get into speculation, because it's very hard to see behind the curtain and how things have transpired and why they've transpired. But in 2012, a new trustee was appointed, and her name was Miss Kimberley, and she was a descendant from the Russian royal family. And as best I can understand, she was given the task of trustee because she had the purest DNA amongst that consolidated group. Now, when she was given the job, she didn't understand that she was the trustee or the boss. She thought she had been given a job like any other person who's been given a job in a corporation, and she was doing what she was told by the people that she believed were in charge of her. And for 2 years...
this is basically being in charge of a world trust that had been amassed by a group of royal elders, right?
And back then there was a lot of trusts,
right,
working as a consolidated block. And she was signing off certain fundings to do certain things. And over the first 2 years, she was really learning what the job was. And then she started to realise that she was actually the boss, and she didn't have to go along with the plan that they were imposing upon her.
But there's actually been several representatives who've stepped up, who were maybe doing part of the job. For instance, Swiss Indo was one of those, part of the job of helping manage the dispensation of the trust. But it seems like it became more and more consolidated, and Miss Kimberly kind of arose as the key person.
Yeah, well, there was more than one trustee pre-2012.
Okay.
There was a group of them, and Miss Kimberly was working with that group. And interestingly enough, the Rothschilds were not part of that group. They were deemed to be lower level puppet masters, but not the real master and controller themselves. But after a period of time, Miss Kimberly realised that their goal and aspirations for the world was to kill off a large chunk of humanity, like the Georgia Guidestones indicate. And she wasn't going to go along with that plan. She thought that all of humanity needed to be recognised as sovereign and worthy of respect, and refused to go along with their diabolical plan. And
so this is actually a beneficial to all of humanity action and intent around some of the large funds that exist in the world.
Yeah. So she's done a couple of things since then. She's consolidated the trusts into um, one trust called the Manna World Holding Trust, and she's been squabbling or fighting, however you like to describe it, with the old trustees and their puppet masters ever since. Now, the situation at the moment is that she has control of the asset. She has ownership, if you like, of the asset, and that can be proved in any number of ways that are beyond my level of security, mind you. I'm just, hearing this and understanding it to be true because of the networks that I have developed over the last few years in my understanding of this. But she doesn't have control of the delivery systems, which are the banks. The banks are the ones that move the money in and out of accounts and things like that. So this is the Mexican standoff we're at the moment. The banks can't create any new money anymore because they don't have that authority. Only the trustees at the top of the list have those sorts of authorities. So the next recession that we're staring down the barrel of at the moment will be one where the too big to fail will be too big to save. There is no bailout money for them. So we're staring at a possibility that many large corporations are going to go to the wall because they're simply unfinancial. And this includes the banks, the insurance companies, the auto industry, the list goes on.
So, Uncle Phil, where do you feel these giant conglomerates that are all woven together, with just about every business on the planet, where do they sit in relationship to, they're really the ones who run the banks? Where do they sit in relationship to this major global fund? And I'm wondering also, I know a lot of people believe there's a fund called the Saint Germain Fund. So I don't know. Can you shed a little light on these things?
The trust, the Manna World Holding Trust, is the ultimate owner of most of the global assets because they've been pledged to it over many years. So she is really the ultimate boss of these transnational corporations, but the corporations themselves haven't got the memo that there's a new trustee or a new owner in place. So they're still listening to the instructions of the old puppet masters or slave masters, and they're confused about what's happening and why funds aren't being delivered as they've been promised. We've all heard over the years about, Chinese elders are going to transfer assets and this and that.
Right.
But the fact of the matter is, there's only one real asset holder that is the beneficiary of the $244 trillion worth of interest. Now, last year or earlier this year, I forget the date exactly, the Chinese debt to the American debt to China was paid off. It was, some number of trillions of dollars. And the Manna World Holding Trust sent a check, cleared the debt. The Chinese acknowledged the clearance of that debt by returning the paperwork. And the debt's being paid because there is money in the system. It's just held in a particular way that's out of sight and out of reach to most people's comprehension. Now, when the Federal Reserve found out about this, they said, well, America owes us $300 trillion. What about paying that debt? So Miss Kimberley said, fair enough. And she transferred the entire US debt to the Federal Reserve, to the feds, and paid it off. And in the next moment, she took a dividend to the trust from the Federal Reserve and essentially reversed the transaction, but leaving the payment of debt in place. So the American government no longer has a debt to the Federal Reserve. It's been paid for. It's been cleared. But the Federal Reserve is owned by the trust. And the trust paid themselves a dividend of the same value and essentially emptied the coffers of the Federal Reserve, because the Federal Reserve had a 99-year tenure, which is expired. So
Right.
the Federal Reserve now is operating outside the rule of law, without a license and without any assets. So it's essentially a dead duck walking,
So
pretending that they haven't reached the point of financial collapse.
So there's many people who would say, "Oh yeah, right. This pie in the cut, pie in the sky story with Miss Kimberly and all of these funds and it being available, but it can't move through the system. Um, how how do you know this is true, or where can we find out more? I mean, it's obviously not something coming out in the everyday news."
Well, there's two sites or two people, if you like, that are close to this news. They are able to speak with Miss Kimberley on a regular basis, and they're reporting this stuff online and have been doing it for quite a few years now. One of them is Stephen Rowe, who goes by the name of Tank and Speak Project, and the other one is a fellow called Thomas Williams, who's an English expat living in America, who is brave enough to continue to tell this story in snippets once a week. And by listening to their shows and their archives, you can piece together what's going on and how it's working.
And so we'll have some
Now,
links to those things under this video.
Now, Miss Kimberley's been interviewed by these people, and the transcripts or the recordings that are available make for very interesting reading. Some of it's frankly unbelievable, but if you take it on face value and suspend your disbelief, what she's saying is remarkable. And it's not a new system, but the financial platform that she operates is called the quantum financial system. Now, there's two of those. There's one being set up by a network of people that you and I know, and there's also the original quantum financial system that is so complex and advanced in its operation that it's impossible to be hacked. It's not located on terra firma. It has all sorts of capacities that are absolutely mind-blowing, and essentially it can see if it's being hacked, and it can shut down the hacking computer in such a dramatic way that those computers essentially need to be replaced. It implements a virus back against the computer that's trying to hack it, and essentially shuts it down or dematerializes it, or something that frankly I don't completely understand how or why or what even. But and she's now working on a way to do account-to-account transactions bypassing any personnel in a bank. For example, if I wanted to send you some money for payment of goods, and we're in two different countries, it gets routed around the world, and it can take up to 3 days or 3 weeks to arrive from my account to your account. And it goes through lots of banks, and lots of people's hands are pressing buttons and moving it on and on and on. And as that money goes around the world, it's monetized again and again and again, which means when a money arrives at a bank, the bank says, "Oh, that's an asset," and they can monetize it 10 times before they pass it on. So essentially the bank increases its net capacity.
Right.
But the new system will be account to account. So it won't be monetized in that way, and it won't take 3 weeks or 3 days. It will be instant. And this is one of the things that has been planned for a long time to speed up the world's economy by doing instant transfers. Because if I make a product, it takes me, I've got to buy materials, I've got to manufacture it, and then I sell it. And in the past, an organisation would say, "I'll pay you in 30 days, which means I don't have access to that capital for 30 days, so I can't make the next product.
Right.
And that slows the economy down. But if I create a product and sell it to you, and you pay me in that moment, I can start making the next product. I can employ people, I can buy more materials. And that, the money velocity is one of the biggest problems that we have in our world today. There's plenty of money, but it's not moving anywhere. And when money moves, it creates wealth. And when money's stagnant, it can't. There was a experiment. It wasn't really an experiment, but on the island of Guernsey, just before the First World War, the English had withdrawn all of the pounds back to England for the war effort. and there wasn't any money in the system, and they needed a port to be built or a wharf. So the trustees of the country, or the mayor and the city elders, got together and said, we need a remedy for this. And the mayor said, well, have we got the materials? Yes, all the materials are on the island. Do we have the labour? Yes, all the labour's on the island, but it's standing idle. Well, what the mayor did, was they issued a Guernsey pound. And that pound paid the employees who built the wharf. And you were also allowed to pay your local taxes using that note. And those notes circulated for many, many, many years. And that country, or that little island, became prosperous because of this debt-free note that was created to create an infrastructure project.
Nice. Well,
And at the end of the war, of course, the Bank of England shut it down. They bought up all the Guernsey pounds and took them out of circulation.
That's amazing. That's a great story, though.
But that's money velocity.
Right. So what hope or what impetus do you think this gives to the global RV, to the possibility of there being, funding available in the system? I mean, if our little village could apply for funds to Miss Kimberly, how close are we to that? What's going on in this cycle?
Well, let me answer that in a moment, but let's step back a moment to the debt clearing of the American government. Now, Miss Kimberly has offered the American government and President Donald Trump sovereignty and the return of the assets. Miss Kimberly is not interested in creating ever more wealth like her previous trustees were. She wants to give it all away and shut it down so that it doesn't get started up again. So she's offered President Trump sovereignty of the nation, and at the moment, the American nation is a chattel through various treaties going back hundreds of years, and essentially has an owner. And hopefully President Trump has unpicked that during his visit to the United Kingdom this week. And that news will come out soon enough. But Ms. Kimberly has offered payment of the debt, return of sovereignty, and ownership of the assets that the trust holds, which includes Washington, D.C., and includes all the banks within the territory of the United States, and all the corporations that are owned in the trust as well. So these assets are being returned. And that plan is to be rolled out across the world. So not only Australia and America and England and France, Germany, all the others, all of them will be returned to the people through an asset redemption type program. The assets will be given back, the debt will be cleared or forgiven, because it can't be paid back. It's just not possible. It's gotten out of hand. It was designed to collapse, and that's why we've had recessions every 10 years, because they pump the economy in order to put money into people's hands to create wealth, and then they collapse the economy in order to steal the wealth that's been created and consolidate their asset into a larger and larger pool. So there is a plan to return it. Now, my understanding is that there will be 3 times GDP given to each country as a lump sum payment in order to assist countries build infrastructure and get back onto a sustainable path. And I don't like the word sustainability, because it suggests that you're treading water only. I like the word thriving. We need a thriving, vital, communities. And in permaculture, we talk about thriving abundance. No, we don't. We talk about planned abundance, designed abundance, where you can design abundance into the system. You don't need to work constantly and like a slave, day and night, and all the time to be abundant. You put a seed into the ground, and the seed grows abundant fruit, and you can pick it for 100 years or 1,000 years, depending on the tree. And that's what abundance is. We talk in permaculture about abundance to share. Grow abundance and share abundantly. And that's the sort of world that we are looking forward to creating.
Yes.
When we got the opportunity to have this foot taken off our throats. and we can breathe for the first time in many generations. Who knows how long this system has been running? But
Yes.
slavery is an old idea, and citizen is just the new word for slave. So it's happening, and project funding, I believe, will be part of the mix for humanitarian thinkers. There is enough money in the system to fund projects. In the Bretton Woods Agreement at the end of World War II, they gave money to the governments of the world for infrastructure rebuilding, but largely that money was stolen by the G7 nations to rebuild their economies, and the rest of the world, including Asia and Africa, missed out. In 2008, the $26 trillion that was created post the financial crisis was given to the corporations. And did the corporations build infrastructure and return it to the people? No, they did share buybacks and consolidated their wealth. So one of the ways that is being planned, in my understanding, is for a bottom-up economic recovery, giving humanitarian thinkers funding for projects so that they can create jobs in their local communities. Those people then pay taxes, create infrastructure, create work and economic opportunities, and eventually it goes around the system, 7 or 8 times before the government gets it in the way of taxes. And that's a better way of redistributing the funds, because giving it to the governments hasn't worked and giving it to the corporations hasn't worked. So I think it'll be a combination of...
There's just been all these different experiments through many generations, and managing it one way, managing it another, and but really the needs of the few have outweighed the needs of the many. And I think we're getting ready to move back into, hopefully, a system where the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few, or, everyone is looked out for.
Yeah. And there's been a plan in America since the death of JFK 50 years ago to go through this transition process. And it's taken a long time because, they've had a running start on all of us. They think generationally, whereas governments, think economic cycles, political cycles, which could be as short as 1.5 years or 2 years, or 3 years, 5 years at the most. Whereas the families of the trust and the banking families, they think on terms of generations. So we've had to, or if you like, the team working in America after the John F. Kennedy assassination have been working on this generational plan in order to shift us from where we were to where we're going. And there is a plan to release the technologies that have hindered, the development of mankind. Tesla invented free electricity over 100 years ago.
Right.
But when Westinghouse found out you couldn't put a meter on it and bill people, they shut it down.
Right.
But those technologies are available. They have been experimented and developed over the last 100 years.
Yes.
And it's my understanding that they've been warehoused and they're ready to roll out. And continents like Africa might be the first recipients of them because they don't have an electricity grid.
Right.
And they are in more desperate need of those devices than we in the West are. But nonetheless, they are going to be rolled out. And not only that, but there's healing technologies. There's all sorts of technologies that are well in advance of what we understand today. I mean, why are we running around in cars that pollute the environment with carbon monoxide burning fossil petrol? It's ridiculous. We could be running electric cars, and we don't need to be, burning fossil fuels to operate those electric cars. We know how to split oxygen and hydrogen from water, and it can be done very cheaply, and the cars can run clean.
Yep.
So all of these things will become available once we've outmaneuvered the old powers of control, and a new system can be implemented. But it all boils down to the financial system, because he who has the money rules.
At least at this phase in our history.
Yeah.
At least for a transitional phase.
Yeah. So that's about where we're up to.
Well, I love that. And I would just like to toss into the soup here. I- I- and just to encourage people to check out the links that will be under this video, because there's so much to learn and to educate yourself on. One of the things I'd like you to think about while I tell this little story is, I know that there are many people working within the system already behind the scenes to help bring these things to pass. And yet people will say to me, oh yeah, how's that possible? Because they're not visible and we never hear about them. But maybe you can tell a little bit about how you think that takes place. In just a second, I'd like to tell a story about a study that was done with deer, where they watched these deer and filmed them, and they wanted to know when the deer would decide to go get water. And the whole herd of deer is out in the mountains, and some of them would raise their noses. They had 3 different watering holes, and some would raise their noses towards one watering hole, some towards another, and some towards another. And the scientists who were doing this experiment thought, well, the big buck is going to be the one who's going to lead them to the watering hole. But what they watched happen, and they did this repeated times, and so it happened every time, was the deer would raise their heads, and when 51% of them had raised their heads and pointed their noses towards a particular water hole, they all would move in that direction and they would go to the watering hole. Because if they went too soon, some of them wouldn't get enough to eat. And if they went too late, some would be thirsty. And so it had to be a decision and a choice of the entire herd to move in that direction. And this is a really beautiful story told in Tom Shadyack's movie, I Am, which is a documentary, really worth watching. He came out of a bicycle accident, coma for a year, and came to and decided that excessive materialism was thought of by many ancient cultures as a mental illness. And he began to get rid of all his possessions and began doing projects that serve the world. So that's possible for all of us. So Uncle Phil, give us some vision, some hope, some ideas of how this is really taking place around the world, this within all the systems that already exist, even
Yeah,
if we
that's a
don't hear
great
about it
story.
on the news.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a great story, Cary, and it can be summed up very simply by saying the wisdom is in the group.
Yes.
Yeah, and we look for the free energy in the system.
Yes.
Water runs downhill. It doesn't need to be pumped. That's free energy.
Yes.
You put a seed in the ground and, the rains come, it grows. That's free energy. If we learn to harvest this free energy that is abundant, and one of the things that made America great in the first place was a simple concept called self-help and mutual help. People helped themselves and they helped each other. And America became the greatest nation on the planet. And we need to get back to that, because at the moment we have this concept of service delivery, expert services being provided by experts who have, gone to school and been programmed into one way of delivering something. And they come over the top of you and say, this is how you're going to fix your life. You go to a psychiatrist, they'll say, you take this pill and you'll get better. Now, those things don't work. They're disempowering. When an expert tells you what to do, your agency is being removed. And self-help and mutual help networks are alive and well all over the place.
Yes.
They work in families. Families come together and stuff gets done because there's no hierarchical control in a family network. The father does some elements, the mother does other elements, and the kids do bits and pieces where they can, if they're not, on the computer machines and the video games. But, mutual help is one of the ways that this world will be transformed, because people like giving. You and I are people that like to give of our time, like to give of our energy. I've worked for the last 10 years, and work's the wrong word, because I don't get paid for it. I give of my time to other people. We spent 2 weeks on a person's farm redoing the water systems with a backhoe and channeling the water so that the water was most effectively utilised across this block of land. We didn't give him a bill for that. He paid the cost of the machinery and the pipes that we needed. And we spent 2 weeks, living off the land, enjoying the sunshine and the effort that we put in. And we saved that man maybe $15,000 worth of expense because we were willing to give it and share. And, you know, we're not looking for, you know, a profit. We're just mutual helping. You know, that will come around back to me in one way or another. Maybe not from him, but from somewhere, you know. So these are the sorts of ways that we can, you know, transform the world. We've got to move away from the idea of profit being purely an economic equation. There is many other types of profit. You know, I profited by learning and working with others and learning new skills, and, you know, that's a good idea. I can use that in my next project. So, you know, there's social profit that needs to be calculated as a real thing. Bhutan has a gross economic happiness indicator. No, they don't measure profit, they measure happiness. All countries need to measure happiness, because at the moment you see so many miserable people in the world, and that's because they're debt slaves to a system that doesn't work.
Right.
You know, are people who are mad and bad necessarily mad and bad, or are they just coping the best they can in a world gone crazy?
Right.
Many years ago in this country, Australia, a psychiatric hospital was created that transitioned the mad and the bad into functional human beings in 12 weeks without any drugs. It rebuilt their networks. It relied on self-help and mutual help. They were taught how to self-empower themselves. They were given their agency back, and they responded because the nonsense was removed out of their lives, and they were allowed to lean on themselves and each other. And when they were given that opportunity, they became regular people again. Nice.
Well, let's kind of close this out, Uncle Phil. I see us as a global culture. Oh, we do have the solar flares that are coming in. Do we want to say a little bit about that? And coming back to the deer story, you know, it is kind of the 100th monkey idea. It is we as humanity waking up to that we are incredible creative beings, and waking up to our super selves, waking up out of the system that we've been programmed in, and discovering how we can serve ourselves and each other. I know people still have the big question, well, how are we going to get access to those funds? Where are those funds going to flow? And we look forward to the quantum system coming into place, and how we can position ourselves to be recipients of those funds when they flow. But we're also being pushed by, as I talk about in my book, 21st Century Superhuman, this great cycle that we're in, this shift of the ages, where we have greater plasma light flowing in our field and pushing us to wake up. So this isn't, it's happening on many levels. And how do we move in this awakening as a collective into a greater world?
There's a few questions there, Cary.
I know.
Starting with the plasma and the thing on the screen at the moment, this is a space weather image of the Schumann resonance frequencies. Now, the Schumann resonance has been described as the heartbeat of the planet, and it's been fixed at 7.8 or thereabouts for as long as it's been measured. But in the last few years, it's been rising, and the bottom of that screen is, I don't know if it can be seen, but it's at the 40 number. So there is impulses coming onto the planet now that's raising the frequency of this human resonance. Now, what does that mean in human terms? Nobody really knows. This is uncharted territory. And taking a sidestep for a moment at climate change, one of the reasons that the climates are changing is because the planet and the solar system has moved into a new field of space called the photon belt. Now, this photon belt is perhaps 2,000 years long, so we're only in the beginning stages of it.
Right.
But this is probably the underlying cause of climate change, and climate change is a ruse, because it's in order to have a one world government, you need a problem that's global to rally everybody into believing that we need a global solution and a global government to solve this problem. And we can solve climate change, if you like, tomorrow by not burning oil and burning hydrogen and oxygen by splitting water and having exhaust gas made of water, you know, harvesting the electricity around the planet. You know, there's a maxim in electrical engineering that says a magnetic field is evidence of current flow. Now, we have a magnetic field around the planet, so there's current being created. If we could tap that current, we could power everything on the planet, essentially, from the magnetic field of Earth. So these things, you know, are going to help us in the transition when we're allowed to use them, and that time is coming very quickly. But getting back to the project funding question, that's probably a question that we can delve into in more depth in another program, because at the moment it's not yet available. When Donald Trump talks about infrastructure spending, that funding will come from the trust, and it won't come with a debt attached to it. So, you know, when he gets access to that and those projects start flowing out across America, that's when we know that the funding is flowing and it's being delivered. At the moment, when they transfer funds from the trust to a bank, the bank attempts to steal the money and use it to pay their bills, and their bills are often nefarious. So the trust is able to take that money back so that the bank has a net zero gain. And, you know, they've just got to try again. And I know that they're trying every day and every week to get the system to operate as the trustee is intending it to happen. But there's a lot of blockages in the system, a lot of people doing the blockages, and this is where the 100,000 indictments come in. These people need to be removed, because at the moment, you know, how many people die every day? Is it 70,000 people a day die of malnutrition? That's ridiculous. There's enough food on the planet
absolutely
to feed everybody. What we have is a distribution problem, and that comes down to economics. And, you know, that can be solved. There is enough money to pay for it. It's just in the wrong place at the wrong time. So eventually we will get to a stage where, you know, this money does start to flow, and when it is opened up for humanitarian projects, we can do another show and tell people how to get access to it.
Yes. Very good. Awesome. Well, we want to remind people to click below the video for many links to educate yourself further. We are living in amazing and exciting times. Uncle Phil, I'm sure this won't be our last conversation on this subject, so we'll look forward to doing another one of these shows together on global economic situations and solutions. And as you and I both know, in the daily lives that we live, there is so much going on behind the scenes that is not visible through the program news media, where this change, the structure of this change is really being moved forward. So we're grateful for that. Keys are continuing to listen to our own hearts, continuing to wake up and think about what we would like to do to help ourselves and help others. What else do you think, Phil? It'd be good for people to be thinking about.
Thanks, Cary, for this opportunity to share this information.
Yes.
I know it's important, and people need to trust themselves and believe in a positive future, because if we have a mindset that is negative and pessimistic, it only creates a spiral of disempowerment.
Yes.
And if we can understand that there are good people on the planet working for the greater good of humanity, we can get excited. You know, the world is an amazing, beautiful place, and it will be in the future a more amazing place than we can ever imagine or comprehend at the moment. You know, I know it's hard to see through the pile of bills on the table, but the opportunity is there, and we need to reach out and embrace it when it comes, and suspend our disbelief on the news as it does transition, because, you know, sooner or later the truth will hit the mainstream media, and it's going to be radically different to what people have imagined. But the limiting factor is people's personal belief systems, and beliefs are hard fought and sticky. You know, belief is a sticky energy, and we need to let go of our dysfunctional beliefs and embrace a new, vibrant, thriving world, because we were sent here by God to thrive. We weren't sent here to be a slave to somebody else. So
That's
we need
right.
to empower ourselves by our positive thinking, and change our ideas and change our minds and be open to these new ideas and concepts when they come. The delivery of new technologies will be as slow as mankind can cope with it, but it will also be as quick as mankind can cope with it. So we embrace new ideas like gravitic drive, anti-gravity machines that can, pick up a car and fly it through the air at the speed of thought, which is millions of times faster than the speed of light. We don't have to sit on the bus or the train or the car and spend 3 days driving across a country. We can, be there in 15 minutes.
Yes.
But until the population of the planet is ready to accept those ideas, and then the responsibility that comes with it, these things will be rolled out more slowly than perhaps you and I would like.
Well,
So get
and
excited.
meanwhile, yes, get excited. Meanwhile, the change can happen quickly. It is within all of us, and it's remembering to breathe, smile, and love, because by just so doing, we literally shift our neurobiology. And remembering the story of the deer, when we all raise our heads together, knowing what's in the well-being for all, we will move forward to the next level, and it will be unstoppable. So we know that we're in that process. We know it's why many of us are here on Earth right now, is to help facilitate this. And want to remind you to check out, we've got some great new things coming at 21stcenturysuperhuman.com, and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel so you don't miss any of these exciting videos. And Uncle Phil, I want to thank you so much for your presence, your knowledge, your well-spoken presence here. And as always, you're a great ally. I appreciate knowing you on this great rainbow of light that we're all operating on planet Earth.
Thanks, Cary. We all appreciate you and love your commitment to humanity as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, well, ciao, ciao, and we shall catch up soon.
Bye, everyone.
Century Superhuman, and I know that the answers are inside. Yeah, I am a 21st Century Superhuman. Now is the time. Come on everyone, let's celebrate. We are the children of the sun. I can see it when I look into your eyes. We are the same, and we are light, yeah, we are one. Hear now, hear my ancient prayer and sing along. We are awakening as one, and we can make a difference. Yeah, we can be the change it takes to make the world a lot more fun. But if you're feeling kinda down and you need some inspiration to remember who you are, oh, now child, please don't frown. You can choose a new vibration, and these words can take you far. I am a 21st Century Superhuman, and I know that the answers are inside. I am the 21st Century Superhuman. Now is the time. feeling kinda down and you need some inspiration to remember who you are. Whoa, now, child, please don't frown. You can choose a new vibration, and these words can take you far. I am a 21st century superhuman, and I know that the answers are inside. I am 21st century superhuman. Now, now, now is the time. I am a 21st century superhuman, and I know that the answers are inside. I am a 21st century superhuman. Now, now, now is the time. Now, now, now is the time. Now, now, now is the time. Now, now, now is the time.